Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Mindful Politics. And things have been happening lately that definitely make you wonder, what is the solution to all of this crap that's happening? Everybody keeps talking about a civil war. It's like, oh, we're going closer to civil war. We're entering civil war. You know, there's like no solution for people. We've been dealing with for the past couple of years extremists who have gone too far and have gotten to such a level of extremism where they have killed people or tried to kill people. Like last night, there was a report that somebody tried to kill a Kentucky Democrat. And that's what I'm talking about. We're dealing with extremes, and so when it comes to this stuff, I think there's been in my mind for the past couple of days a realization that what we lack, as far as this goes, especially with a lot of extremists, is empathy, proper empathy. And that's what we need more of. Like there's been people who have been, Joe Rogan, for instance. What they'll do is they'll look at things that he said 10 years ago and say this is wrong and bad, and perhaps it is, right? But there's no redemption, there's no apologizing to these people, because they're just like, oh, you're bad anyways, no matter what, because there's no empathy. It's not, in my opinion, I don't think it's about apologizing for doing right with these people. I think it's just a way for them to get more views, to gin up his area, because it serves them, it works for them, for whatever reason, right? And so when he apologizes, it just makes them look correct to their mind, and then nothing changes. Because they have no empathy. They have no empathy for the other side. They may have empathy for themselves, for their in group, but not for the out group. And that's part of the problem, is that we have abandoned, a lot of these people in politics have abandoned empathy for judgment. And this is causing problems. There's not enough empathy for the out group. Are we going to fix these problems by judging people and by getting angry at them and saying, you're wrong, you're dumb, you're bad, you're evil, blah, 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 blah? Or are we going to fix them by going, okay, I may not agree 100% with what you did, but if you apologize, that's, fine with me. Let's talk about it. But that's not what they do, because it doesn't serve their narrative to do that. They just gin up hysteria about these things. They just go, oh, you're wrong anyways. You're bad anyways. So there's not enough empathy. There's not enough empathy in certain directions. And so the problem isn't extremism. And in my opinion, it has more to do with empathetic responses to the out group. It's extremely easy to be empathetic to an in group, whatever your in group is. Friends, family, people you agree with, things like this, right? But it's a lot harder for people to be empathetic to the out group, especially if you're more extremist. You have more of a what's the phrase? You're either with us or against us mentality. This is what happens when you have no empathy for the out group and you don't understand the out group. And so you have to become aware of this problem in some way, shape, or form. Even it doesn't really matter what your group is, in my opinion. It's because whether you be left or right has nothing really to do, in my opinion, with whether you're correct or not. I mean, you can be wrong and be on the left and be right and be wrong and be on the right. I've seen both sides of this. A lot of people like to a lot of the more anti-left wing people like to say it's the left that's the problem, and there's a lot of problems there. To be honest, I'm not saying there isn't, but to say that is to create an in group and an out group, which is exactly what we shouldn't be doing, especially if you want to keep things the way they are as much as possible. So a kind of corollary to this is individualism versus collectivism. What we're dealing with right now is a difference between individualism and collectivism. Sometimes hyper-individualism, where it's like so extremely individualistic, where it's like, no, this is my decision, my freedom, my choice, And to some extent, I get it. I'm not saying it's wrong to do that. I think there's problems with that. But then we go on the other side where it's hyper-collectivistic, where it's like, you don't get to decide for the majority of us. Like in Canada now, they're freezing people's bank accounts for protesting against the mandates. That's hyper-collectivism. It's not about the individual. It's not even really about trying to empathize with the individuals in this case and trying to compromise. It's just do what we say and do it now because we said so. That's hyper-collectivism. And both of those are trying not to use the word wrong here, but both of those are missing valuable points about each of these two forms of these two ideas, basically. With hyper-individualism, or with individualism, not hyper-individualism. And I'll get into the differences and similarities between, and I'll get more into what hyper-individualism and collectivism is in a minute, but with individualism, it's about freedom for the individual. Like, one of the problems that you can run into with mask mandates, or not mask mandates, sorry, that's a different sort of story, but with the vaccine mandates is that some people are allergic to the vaccine, to certain things that are in it. And so if you force vaccine mandates, it's hyper-collectivism. It will, this person cannot, if the person cannot get it because he's allergic to it, and his doctor says it's not a good thing for him to take for various reasons, you will force him anyways because of hyper-collectivism. if you don't take it, you can't go anywhere, you can't do these things, whatever it is, right? That's more of a hyper-collectivist point of view, where it's so collectivist that it ignores nuances and caveats in this understanding. That's what we're dealing with right now is hyper-collectivism versus hyper-individualism. So individualism focuses on self, freedom for all, but mostly freedom for the self, because if you are a collectivist, or if you're an individualist, your response to collectivism is that it causes problems because democracy is not a good thing for various reasons. People like to say we are a democracy in the United States and things, but we're actually not, and there's a good reason for why that is. So back in the day, long time ago, in deep democracy, or in Greece was a democracy, and whatever the majority said goes. And so one day there was a man called Socrates, right? And he was a philosopher, and some of the people that he taught, not all, but a few, like one or two, I think, actually made some mistakes and caused Greece their freedom in certain ways. Still had democracy and things like this, and so their response, the Greeks, were to basically say you will stop teaching philosophy, or you will be forced to take poison. That was the majority rule, basically, and he basically said no, right? And so that's what democracy is. It's why democracy doesn't work. Because if you have a majority... Okay, so I'll give you an example of why this is problematic. And this is actually something that's happened in this country as it is in the United States. But for different reasons, I think. But so let's say you have a majority white group. And if it's a democracy, that means everybody who is in the country, although I believe at the time it was like everybody who owned property and things like this, right, can vote. They will vote to enslave other groups because they disagree with them or whatever, right? Or they will vote to take away people's freedoms because they're democracy. The other side of this too is that if this is a pure democracy, what would happen is that the bigger cities would often get their way, and the smaller areas would suffer, would deal with other problems. Smaller states and the bigger states. Not really the bigger cities in this case, because it's national, but the bigger states would have more votes than the smaller states, typically, and so there would be a disproportionate response to that. Like if you have, like, say you have 50 states, and 20 of them, I think it's like 20, I don't remember how many are the bigger ones, but like say 20 of them are bigger. Let's say they hold about 35% of the people, and so these states vote. 35 might not seem like much. We could even go further with this, right? Let's say you have 20 states, that have about 51% of the vote. Because we do have more states. We have a lot of states that are bigger than very small states. And so they vote, they will make the majority of the decisions. Because the majority would rule, and so the small states wouldn't have a say and they wouldn't be able to get anything done for themselves and whatnot. That would be hyper collectivism. So individualism is about freedom because each of an individual is different. That can go to extremes with hyper individualism where it's like not doing something for the good of all because it's not what I want to do and things like this. There's different degrees I think we can talk about and make a discussion over as far as that goes. But collectivism is about the greater good for all kind of thing. And the collectivism argument, a lot of people in the individual sector dislike collectivism because they don't understand it, or they often kind of go hyperbolic with it, like, oh, collectivism is communism and things like this, right? But there are simple examples of collectivism that we all kind of do to a certain extent, like the social contract and things like this. In some ways, are not a complete collectivism, but it's collectivism in a sense. Like you're deciding not to do certain things because it will hurt the collective. And we don't decide today to withdraw from the country because it doesn't serve it, for whatever reason, or we don't do unpatriotic things because it doesn't work in collectivism. But the problems are when these two go too far, with hyper-individualism and hyper-collectivism. So, and like I said, this all, I think, goes into different degrees. And will depend on who you're talking to and whatnot. I think that we can make compromises about what these things are. But with hypercollectivism, typically speaking, you have the attitude of like, just do what you're told because it serves the nation, it serves the greater good, so that they think, right? That's what they think. It doesn't mean it's true necessarily, but that's what they say and think. With the hyper individuals, it's like, I don't care what you say, what you want. I will do what I want anyway. To a certain extent, there are moments where that makes sense. But sometimes that can go too far. It could be about the self so extremely that, like, you won't go and save people, or you won't help people, or whatever, for various reasons. Like, it just depends on the degree of hyper individualism or hyper collectivism. And we need a balance of both individualism and collectivism. And because both sides here, the individualists and the collectivists, are arguing with each other, disagreeing so much, and even going to extremes of trying to kill each other, we're seeing a divide where the hyper individualists become more hyper individualistic and the hyper collectivists become more hyper collectivistic. kind of like reverse psychology, where what you'll see is people will say, "You better do this. You do this thing now," and they say, "No, go fuck yourself." It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing here, where what you'll see is like the hyper-collectivists will say, "You do what you're told," whatever it is, and the others go, "No." And to a certain extent, I agree. I understand that response. But we have nobody, very little people, very few people, if anybody at all, going between them and going, "Okay, I get your response. I understand your response. Can we work together to compromise?" Life isn't about getting what you want. People would like to say, especially nowadays with these popular psychology people and new age type people, like, "Oh, you should just get what you want. The law of attraction it works in this way. Just do this thing and you'll get everything that you want," right? But I don't think life is about getting what you want. It's never been about getting what you want. People like to make that distinction because we have very stage orange culture. It's very much capitalistic. It's like bigger, better now. Like, oh, I want this thing, because we've been taught that by commercials and advertisements and all this crap. But life isn't about getting what you want, and it shouldn't be, because think about it this way: like, if you get what you want, if you go do what you want, and everybody else does the same. So, I'll try and give you an example, right? Okay, so say everybody thinks the same thing. Life is about getting what you want. What's going to happen is a hyper-individualistic culture and society where nobody cares about anybody else. There's very little empathy, which is what we're kind of getting now. And everybody's trying to get what they want, what they think they need. And that doesn't just apply to themselves, but it applies to culture. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's kind of odd, too, that we're seeing this with even the hyper-collectivists, where it's not even about the greater good for society. It's the greater good for what they want for society. And it's because we have this attitude that a lot of capitalism is kind of brought to us that says we can get what we want. We should get what we want. Just get it. Just do it bigger, better now. And that's precisely the wrong response, in my opinion. Not that it's wrong, like, "Oh, you're bad," wrong. But like wrong as in like, it just doesn't work, wrong. Like, it's incorrect. It's not working. It's because it's causing us problems. Like, let's say you have 10 people in a farm working together, and each person wants to get what they want. And they don't really focus on each other, and they don't really care about each other that much. They just get what they want. Like, "Oh, I want some peas. Here, yeah, let's plant some peas. Let's plant these. Let's plant that." What's going to happen is that one day they're going to argue with each other and bicker with each other because they're not getting everything they want. Because you can't get everything you want. It's just not possible. It's impossible to get what you want all the time. But because we live in a culture of now, people never grew up with this lesson within the past 10, 20, 30 years or whatever. People want to say it's the millennial generation, right? But I think that's an overgeneralization, because there are millennials who can see this, understand this, right? I don't think it's about millennial generation. I think it's about people who haven't thought hard enough about this understanding of, oh, you can just get whatever you want. Just go for it. Go do it, right? You can do anything you want to do. All this kind of crap. Which you can't do anyways. Like, some people have physical ailments that keep them from doing whatever they would want to do. whatever that is, right? And so what we're dealing with really is a hyper individualist society that basically praises this idea of just getting anything you want. Just go, do it now. Go, 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 go. And the bottom dollar, the bottom line, whatever it is. And that causes problems because if you are in a society and in a political reality of sorts, what you're going to see is that times where you're not going to get what you want. And so there's basically 2 or 3 responses you can do to that when you realize this. You can go, oh, that makes sense. You understand it, you accept it, you realize it. You can kind of resist it, if you want. And the second response is resist it, but you still kind of like understand that it's happening. And you kind of move on eventually. Third thing you could do is just keep resisting it. Just go fight it, go, 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 go. Or you can kind of like, it's kind of in the second category. Like there's different degrees of resistance. It's just kind of like a spectrum. You can find yourself accepting it, but like maybe not completely or whatever. But because we live in this society that tells us these things, we don't really have moments where we realize what's happening. Like most people don't think hard enough about these things half the time, I've noticed, to question them in their mind. I'm not saying it's a bad thing on their part. I'm not saying that they're dumb for not doing that. But what I've noticed is that with empathy, or with we'll get into empathy in a minute, but with this problem of trying to get everything that you want, you run into the problem of not getting what you want. So life is not about getting what you want. It's about compromising. I made an episode on my podcast, The Specifist, a long time ago called Life is About Compromises and Workarounds. Basically what I was talking about was like what you normally get out of life is people going, oh, I want this, I want that, I want this. Right? But what you will end up getting instead is something different. Where you're not going to be getting all these things. And maybe it's a good thing that you're not, because then you would become selfish and spoiled and obsessed, and that's kind of what we're seeing right now. Because we have such a stage orange type of society right now, where it's like stage orange of spiral dynamics. If you want to know more about spiral dynamics, you can type in stage orange, spiral dynamics, or whatever into YouTube, and you can find a bunch of videos. Basically, stage orange is like the capitalistic ideal. But the mindset doesn't change. It doesn't change when it experiences that it doesn't get what it wants. And this is why I've always questioned, especially lately, the past couple of years, I've always thought harder about these things and going, is that really true? Is that really accurate? Because you look to experience and you go, oh, wait, that experience differs from this understanding here and that understanding there. Doesn't mean that those understandings are wrong. I think they can add something to the conversation. But they're not the most correct way of perceiving what's happening here. So going back to empathy, because I'm going to try and wrap this up. It's probably been a long episode as it is, but what we really need to start doing more of, and this is something I'm trying to do more of, is to accept or understand at least other perspectives, and empathize with whatever the outgroup is. Doesn't mean that we agree with them. Empathizing doesn't necessarily mean agree with the person, but it means to accept what the person is saying. You ask questions about it, and you try and get to the heart of what they're actually saying, and empathize, like I said, because what we're experiencing right now is a lack of empathy, and it's increasing more and more lately, is because we're dealing with people who are just plainly angry because they don't understand what's happening here. They don't understand that, like, a lot of these politicians are, and a lot of the media, and honestly, this is something that I think people need to understand more of. But the media is not your friend. The media is not giving you truthful and accurate information. I'm not saying that they're lying all the time. It's not like 100% this and 100% that, or 0% this and 0% that. It's more like the media is ratcheting up things because they themselves, they may be part of the problem as well. They're not empathetic enough, and they're ginning up hysteria, or they're just trying to get more clicks. They're trying to get more people to view their stuff for whatever reason. And so the media is not your friend as far as this goes, because the media is going to ratchet up things, and they have been doing so for the past 10 years. The main reason why this is happening is because of the media in the first place, honestly, if you want to be completely honest about it, because the media isn't your friend. It's not here to give you truthful information. It never was. Really, what the media is trying to do is to, and I'm not saying that they're not trying to give you truthful information. I mean, I'm sure there are some that are, but the problem is that because the media has become so biased, because we're all biased. It's not because the media is biased and we're not. It's because we're all biased in the same way, right? In different ways. Well, somebody might be biased more to the left, and somebody might be biased more to the right, but it's all the same bias, basically. But because the media is so biased, and for the longest time, people thought that the media wasn't biased, people bought into this inaccurate idea that the media was out to tell you the truth and give you what is true. And that's never really what the media has ever been doing. That may be their stated goal, but it's not actually happening. It's never really happened. With few exceptions, right? But now what we're dealing with is, because of the divide, there's a really interesting thing that happens when people come together. Like, say if you have two groups, the left and the right, let's say they believe in the left. One group A, believes in what the left believes in, and Group B believes kind of in the centrist way, and then you have like Group C that believes more right-wing stuff. And so, let's say, give you two examples. The first example is where Group A, B, and C don't connect with each other and don't empathize with each other. What happens? Group B is probably going to basically stay the same, but Group A, because they are within this group, the bubble of Group A, is going to go more Group A, going to go more left, and Group C is going to do the same thing in certain ways. And they're going to go more, if not necessarily go more right, they're going to go more individualistic. are not going to see the points of Group A and Group B, or maybe they will see the points of Group B to a certain extent. But actually, what we're seeing is a bit of the opposite, where it's not Group A and B and C that are disconnected. It's Group A that's disconnected from Group B and C, because Group B and C have kind of stayed somewhat the same. The center has kind of moved away from Group A, not because they're moving away themselves, because Group A moves away from them. Group A is like so moving away from them that it's like the center is, there's this weird meme that is kind of true in some ways, where what you'll see is the center, and then that's nothing in the left for a while, and then there's far left, and then there's the right. And then, of course, there is far right, but that's like a very small group. But ironically, the far right has more left-wing positions than the right wing does. But anyways, that's another subject. I believe Richard Spencer actually endorsed Joe Biden, which was really interesting to me. But anyways, so that's example one. Group A and B are separate, and because they are only talking to themselves, they're basically not moving, or if they are, they're moving further away from each other. This is part of the problem with bubbles, right? And so the second example is where Group A, B, and C come together, maybe not necessarily to agree, but just to understand each other or whatever. And they come away understanding each other's points. And because of that, they come a little closer. They're not as far left or right as they were. Assuming that the right is far right, which is honestly a term that's overused anyways. Like when they mean far right, they're talking, the word far right is overused because it's not really a far right. A lot of the so-called members that are far right, like Richard Spencer, are actually not even right wing. They have a lot of left wing positions. And so if you want to use the word for those people, use the word neo-Nazi or the alt-right, even though they're not even really right wing, but they call themselves alt-right. That phrase makes more sense than far right, because far right is not really what these people are anyways. But anyways, so what we're seeing is the first example, where Group A is kind of like looking at Group B and C and saying, "Oh, you people are dumb, you're wrong," and because they are now in a bubble, and some people won't say they're in a cult. I won't use that phrase because I think that phrase is just overused. But what they mean by this phrase is that Group A doesn't, because Group A is only listening to themselves, for the most part, they are in such a bubble that because they're only listening to themselves, for the most part, like if they are listening to Group B or C, it's in the context of their bubble. Like, say if you have somebody talking about how vaccine mandates are a problem for this reason or whatever, Group A will look at that and look at it only from their context and their perspective, and they will only show how this person is wrong based on their perspective, and they won't go beyond that. And that's what they mean by when they say the word cult. I think it's a wrong word to use because it doesn't really mean anything. It's almost more used as a dogmatic term, like anymore. Like it's not really meant as a. See, the problem with the word cult is that it's just oftentimes I've noticed that people just use it because it gives the impression of something that it doesn't necessarily give it that it isn't necessarily. But like for instance, if you use the word like cult, like I am the cult here because I'm talking to you. Not that I necessarily think that the underlying reasoning behind what this phrase that they're using is wrong. I think the phrase itself is used almost to dismiss what the other group is saying to a certain extent, and I don't think it's making things better. I don't think it's making people come together. Hold on a second.
Speech on. Left channel off. Recording duration 41 minutes 24 seconds. Speech off.
Yeah, we're coming closer to the end here. But basically, I'm going to try and wrap this up here. But last thing I will end here with is that there's been this kind of like misinformation of sort. Well, not really misinformation. I don't want to use that word. But there's been this mistaken idea from the more freedom-loving, centrist and right-wing people that say that, logic is the way to get through to people. But there's been a lot of evidence actually showing the opposite, that it's not actually logic that does this, but it's the coming together of people. Like for instance, so giving 2 examples, right? Say you're talking to Group A or somebody from Group B and you're Group C and you're trying to get them to join Group C. What works? Right? Let's say first example is you use logic. You say, okay, so this is wrong here, this is incorrect here, this is wrong here, this is kind of right, but this is wrong here, whatever it is, right? Depending on who the person is and depending on how calm the person is. Mostly I've noticed the more centrist you are, the more calm you tend to be. But, if you're doing this to like Group A, you're going to get a very noticeable response because you're not really dealing with them at their current level. You're dealing with them at your level. You're kind of like talking to them from your own. You're basically talking. It's almost like talking to yourself, really, because they're not really listening to them, and they can't really listen to you because they're too stuck in their own perspective. And so what you do, and this is something that I've seen to a certain extent that's happening more and more lately, but it's still very much in its infancy. But what you would do is actually go, let's come together, let's connect, let's try and make sense of these things. We can agree, we can disagree. That'd be great. Let's just talk about it, and then you try and come at it from more of an emotional place, in a sense. Not emotional as in like, oh no, like not emotional as in like negative emotions or like even like super positive ones, but like you're trying to connect with the person and you're trying to get them to connect to what you're saying in a more personal kind of way, because logic is more impersonal. Not that I disagree with using logic, but the logic should be kind of secondary to the act of connecting with the group in question or the person in question. This is something that I've had to really learn more of and see more of within the past couple of weeks or months or even days, really. So, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this long-ass episode. And talk to the next one. So, not much left to say here, except that when it comes to empathy, there's actually 2 basic types of empathy as well: collectivist versus individual. And one of the problems, I think, to a certain extent, that's happening is that the empathy is in some cases becoming a little too hyper-collectivist as well. So there's something to consider as well when dealing with empathy and empathetic responses. But like I said, I don't think it's about blaming or saying somebody is wrong. It's about connecting and trying to find out why somebody believes this. And then you don't have to agree, but you just have to understand and see from their perspective and connect from that onward. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is a bit of a long one, but most of them are pretty long that I do anymore, so this is Mindful Politics, and I will talk to you in the next one.